I want you to picture something for a second. Imagine you are stepping off a really hot, noisy, concrete city street.
Okay.
You walk up to this totally nondescript industrial building, you punch in a code, and you step through a pair of heavy, sealed airlock doors.
Right, like a clean room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And immediately, the entire atmosphere shifts. Like the air inside is thick with this perpetual, cool mist that just clings to your skin.
Oh, wow. That's quite a shift.
Yeah, and above you, these automated shades are precisely filtering the artificial light, shifting in real time. And in the background, you hear the low, rhythmic hum of a climate computer.
So highly controlled environment.
Very. It's a system that's literally scheduled to drop the temperature to the exact decimal point the moment the sun would normally set over a mountain range, thousands of miles away.
I mean, honestly, it sounds distinctly like a facility you would design for a Martian colony or maybe a deep space outpost. The level of environmental isolation is just nearly absolute.
It really is. But the growers inside this facility aren't trying to terraform another planet. They are meticulously recreating an entire Andean mountain ecosystem right here on Earth.
A literal indoor mountain.
Yeah, specifically, they are building an indoor cloud forest. And they are doing all of this, the airlocks, the climate computers, the suspended mist, just to produce one notoriously demanding, buttery, heart-shaped fruit.
The Highland cherimoya.
You guessed it. And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. We have a massive stack of sources for this deep dive, and our mission is basically to give you a masterclass in ecological reconstruction.
It's an incredible topic. It really represents the absolute cutting edge of controlled environment agriculture, which the industry just refers to as CEA.
Right, CEA. And we are pulling from a bunch of different places today. We've got a detailed horticultural broadcast transcript all about recreating the Andean canopy, plus cultivation guides from UC Agriculture and Natural Resources.
We also have botanical research from the MDPI journal focusing on specific plant morphotypes down in Ecuador.
Yeah, and even some hyper-specific container physics studies that are honestly going to completely upend how you think about potting soil.
It requires a really remarkable synthesis of disciplines. I mean, we are going to look at atmospheric engineering, plant endocrinology, and fluid dynamics.
All of that just to grow a piece of fruit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All converging to keep a single, highly specialized botanical organism alive outside of its native habitat.
Well, before we look at the engineering required to build a mountain indoors, I think we need to understand the biological demands of the plant itself, because the Cherimoya annona chirimula is not like an apple or an orange.
No, definitely not.
Those are crops that humanity has, bred for centuries to tolerate a huge variety of global climates. The Cherimoya, though, it seems to actively resist adaptation.
It really does. It is an incredibly inflexible organism. The cherimoya's native habitat is the inter-Andean valleys of Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia.
So really high up.
Right. We are talking about specific high-altitude microclimates, generally situated between 1,500 and 2,000 meters above sea level. So that is roughly 4,900 to 6,600 feet.
Wow.
And in these specific valleys, the climate functions as basically an eternal spring. It is characterized by exceedingly narrow temperature bands.
Just a perfect temperature all year round.
Pretty much. During the day, the temperature hovers pleasantly between 65 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. And then at night, it reliably drops down to a cool 50 to 59 degrees.
The etymology of the name actually serves as a warning label for anyone trying to grow it. The word cherimoya comes from the Quechua word chirimoya,
which translates to cold seeds, right?
Exactly, cold seeds. And that's a direct reference to the plant's uncompromising biological requirement.
Yeah, for the seeds to germinate properly and for the plant to thrive at all, it requires that specific exposure to cooler mountain altitudes. It is classed as subtropical or mild temperate.
So you can't just plant it anywhere.
Definitely not. It flat out resents the excessive dry heat of interior deserts, and it equally rejects the prolonged, stagnant, high humidity of the lowland tropics.
The sources mentioned an experiment at the Botanic Gardens in Singapore. They tried to plant cherimoyas there, thinking, hey, it looks like a tropical fruit, let's just put it in the tropics.
And I imagine that didn't go well.
It just failed entirely.
Yeah.
The trees couldn't handle the constant heat and moisture.
Well, that makes sense. The metabolic processes of the plant simply cannot function without that diurnal temperature shift the drop from the warm day to the cool night.
Without that drop, it just dies.
Yeah, without it, the plant exhausts its carbohydrate reserves and perishes.
So it requires a total Goldilocks zone. But the payoff is legendary. I mean,
Yeah, right.
Mark Twain famously called the cherimoya the most delicious fruit known to men.
That's quite the endorsement.
Right? It's a compound fruit, conical or heart-shaped, and they can get massive, like weighing up to 5 pounds.
Oh, wow. 5 pounds for a single fruit.
Yeah. And the sources describe the flesh inside as white, melting, and subacid, which, just to clarify for everyone listening, subacid in flavor profiling means it has a perfect equilibrium.
Meaning a balance of sweet and sour.
Exactly. It has enough natural acidity to give it a bright, complex character, but it's completely balanced by the sugar, so it's not tart at all.
People often compare it to a blend of banana, pineapple, and strawberry.
Yeah, with a texture almost like custard or sherbet.
Right.
But it's packed with these hard, black, bean-like seeds.
You know, if we pull back and look at the historical context, the human relationship with this fruit is just ancient.
Oh, really? How far back are we talking?
Well, archaeological digs in Peru have uncovered pottery shaped like cherimoyas that dates back to 1000 BC.
That's incredible.
It is, but there is a fascinating anomaly in the modern genetic research. I was reviewing the data from the MDPI journal on genetic mapping, and it reveals something really surprising.
Wow.
While we associate the cherimoya entirely with the Andes, the greatest genetic diversity of the plant actually exists much further north, in Honduras and Guatemala.
I noticed that in the research, too, and it seems so contradictory. If the plant originated in the high altitudes of Ecuador and Peru, how did the genetic base end up so concentrated in Central America?
Right, it's a bit of a puzzle, but it points to a vast, unrecorded history of human-assisted migration.
Meaning people physically carried it there.
Exactly. Indigenous peoples across the Americas recognized the value of this fruit and were actively trading and cultivating it long before the Columbian Exchange.
Wow.
They painstakingly moved it across the continent, seeking out specific highland microclimates in Central America that perfectly matched those Andean valleys.
And over centuries of isolated cultivation in those new regions, the genetics just diverged and multiplied.
Precisely.
But, despite this long history of humans adoring the fruit, the plant itself has a pretty dark side. This isn't a completely benign organism.
No, not at all.
The fruit is a delicacy, obviously. But the seeds, the leaves, and the branches all contain a really high concentration of ananaceous acetogenins.
Which are highly toxic alkaloids.
Exactly. They are potent neurotoxins and cytotoxins. Historically, indigenous populations would actually crush the seeds and use the resulting powder to kill lice and other parasites.
It's an incredibly effective insecticide.
Yeah, and the medical literature in our sources notes that if a human ingests these compounds, they act as a severe emetic and cathartic.
Which is the very clinical way of saying it will induce violent vomiting and completely clear out your digestive tract.
Yeah, it is a severe biological reaction. You do not want to chew those seeds.
It is a classic, highly specialized evolutionary defense strategy, though. The plant needs to protect its foliage from grazing herbivores, so it fills its leaves with insecticidal and toxic compounds.
But it still needs its seeds to be distributed.
Right. So it encases those toxic seeds in an incredibly appealing, sweet, nutrient-dense fruit. Specialized animals eat the fruit, swallow the hard seeds whole without breaking them, and pass them safely, dispersing the plant.
It's an elegant, if ruthless, system.
Very ruthless.
So, we have this tree. It produces a world-class fruit, but it has zero tolerance for standard agricultural climates. It demands the exact temperature swings of a mountain.
Yes.
It hates lowland humidity but requires perpetual mist, and it's armed with toxic alkaloids.
It's quite the resume.
Right. So if you want to grow this commercially in a warehouse to meet modern market demand, you have to fundamentally engineer the atmosphere.
Which brings us to the first massive engineering hurdle. Simulating the perpetual cool mist of an Andean cloud forest is not as simple as installing some overhead sprinklers.
Right. The UC agricultural guys are very explicit about this. If you just spray water over the canopy, you will ruin the crop entirely.
Absolutely.
Why is traditional agricultural misting so destructive to the cherimoya?
Well, it comes down to the physics of water droplet size, which is dictated by water pressure. Standard agricultural misting systems operate on municipal water pressure.
Which is what, usually around 50 to 60 pounds per square inch?
Exactly, 50 to 60 psi. At that relatively low pressure, the water droplets generated are physically large, typically greater than 50 microns in diameter.
That's a bad thing.
Yes. Because they possess significant mass, they fall rapidly through the air column. They don't float, they land directly on the foliage and the soil surface.
Now, if you're a casual gardener, getting the leaves wet seems like a good thing, right? Like you're watering the plant.
In an open outdoor environment with intense wind and sunlight to dry the leaves, it can be acceptable. But in a closed CEA environment, constantly soaking the leaves creates a perpetually saturated canopy.
Oh, and water resting on the leaf surface creates a microscopic aquatic environment.
Exactly. And that is the perfect breeding ground for severe fungal pathogens, most notably anthracnose, which will rapidly rot the developing fruit. Furthermore, all that large droplet water just runs off the leaves and heavily saturates the root zone.
So the goal isn't to make the plant wet. The goal is to make the air itself humid.
Right.
So how do the CEA growers achieve that if they can't use standard sprinklers?
They utilize industrial high-pressure fogging systems. These operate at much higher pressures, often upwards of 1,000 psi, forcing water through highly specialized ceramic or stainless steel nozzles.
1,000 psi, that's intense.
It is. This intense pressure atomizes the water, shearing it into incredibly fine microdroplets, often smaller than 5 microns.
They are so small they essentially defy gravity.
Precisely. They lack the mass to fall quickly, so they remain suspended in the air currents. More importantly, because their surface area to volume ratio is so high, these microdroplets flash evaporate before they ever touch a leaf.
Oh, wow. So they turn into vapor instantly.
Yes. This phase change, liquid water converting to water vapor, absorbs thermal energy from the surrounding air. It is evaporative cooling operating at maximum efficiency.
So the foliage remains completely dry to the touch, preventing those fungal outbreaks, but the air becomes saturated.
Exactly, replicating an Andean high-altitude fog.
And all of this precise atmospheric control, the atomization, the evaporation, the cooling, is geared toward managing one critical metric that the sources emphasize heavily.
Yes, vapor pressure deficit, or VPD. Managing VPD is the absolute crux of modern controlled agriculture. It is the invisible metric that dictates plant behavior.
I have to admit, vapor pressure deficit sounds intimidatingly technical.
It does sound like a mouthful.
From reading the horticultural transcript, it seems like VPD is essentially a measurement of the plant's ability to sweat. If the air gets too dry, the plant just shuts down the factory, is that right?
That is actually a very functional way to look at it. To be technically precise, vapor pressure deficit is the deficit between the amount of moisture currently in the air and the maximum amount of moisture the air could possibly hold at that specific temperature.
Okay, so it measures the drying power or the thirstiness
Yeah.
of the ambient air.
Correct. So high VPD means the air is hot, dry, and acting like a sponge, actively trying to pull moisture out of everything. And a low VPD means the air is already saturated and humid.
And plants perform best within a very specific, comfortable range.
They do. And for the Highland cherimoya, the optimal threshold is keeping the VPD below 1.0 kilopascals, or kPa.
What happens if it goes over that?
Well, if the greenhouse temperature rises and the humidity drops, the VPD spikes above 1.2 kPa. When that happens, the atmosphere exerts tremendous pulling force on the moisture inside the plant's leaves.
So the air starts stealing water from the plant.
Exactly. The air begins extracting water faster than the plant's root system can absorb it from the soil.
And that's when the tree starts losing water pressure. Its turgor pressure drops.
Yes.
And just to clarify, turgor pressure is essentially the internal hydrostatic pressure of the plant, right? Like the fluid pressure against the cell walls that keeps the leaves firm and upright, almost like water filling a balloon.
That's a perfect analogy. When turgor pressure drops, the plant experiences acute physiological stress. To protect itself from total desiccation, the cherimoya rapidly closes its stomata.
And the stomata are those microscopic, mouth-like pores on the underside of the leaves, right? The ones controlled by guard cells.
Yes, they are the plant's breathing apparatus. When the VPD is too high, those guard cells deflate, the stomata snap shut, and transpiration, the plant's equivalent of sweating, halts entirely.
But the stomata aren't just for sweating. They're also how the plant breathes in carbon dioxide.
And that is the cascade failure right there. With closed stomata, carbon dioxide can no longer enter the leaf tissue. Without carbon dioxide, the process of photosynthesis literally stops.
The plant can no longer convert light into energy.
Exactly.
I mean, if you're running a commercial greenhouse and your plants aren't photosynthesizing, you're losing money by the minute.
It gets worse. If this high VPD state persists, the tree makes a drastic evolutionary survival choice. It will systematically abort its flowers and drop its developing fruit to the ground.
Wait, it just drops everything?
Yes, it sacrifices reproduction to conserve enough water to keep the main trunk and vascular system alive.
Wow. So those 1,000 psi foggers aren't just there to make the room look like a cool cloud forest. They are an invisible, critical life support system.
Absolutely essential.
The sensors detect the VPD creeping up toward 1.0 kPa.
Yeah.
The foggers blast atomized water, the air cools, the humidity rises, the VPD drops, and the stomata stays safely open.
It is a constant minute-by-minute balancing act of atmospheric physics.
So we have engineered the sky. The canopy is bathed in the perfect artificial Andean mist. But that brings us down to the ground.
The root zone.
Right. In the wild, cherimoys are clinging to steep, rocky mountain slopes. Gravity pulls the torrential mountain rains away from the roots almost instantly. But in our CEA facility, these trees are often confined to large pots and containers.
Which introduces a whole new set of problems.
Yeah. And this brings us to a massive, widely believed misconception about drainage. If you're listening to this and looking at a potted pothos or fiddle leaf fig in your living room right now, you might want to pay close attention.
Because the physics of the root zone are completely counterintuitive. Container hydrology is an entirely different discipline than open field soil science.
And the cherimoya is exceptionally vulnerable to root zone errors, isn't it?
Extremely. They are highly susceptible to soil-borne anaerobic pathogens, specifically Armillaria amelia, which causes oak root fungus, and verticillium wilt.
So if their roots sit in stagnant water,
They will suffocate and rot within days. They absolutely demand rapid drainage and a slightly acidic to neutral pH around 5.5 to 7.5.
which brings us to the grandmother of all gardening myths.
Yeah.
Every basic gardening blog, hardware store employee, and old wives' tale tells you the exact same thing. If you plant something in a pot, you must put a 2-inch layer of gravel or broken pottery at the bottom of the pot to improve the drainage.
Right, I hear this all the time.
But our sources, specifically the studies on container media physics, debunk this completely. That advice actually causes the exact rot we are trying to avoid.
It is perhaps the most persistent and damaging misunderstanding of fluid dynamics in horticulture.
It's crazy because the logic seems sound on the surface, right?
Yeah.
Gravel is coarse, it has large air spaces, so water should easily fall through the soil and into the gravel, keeping the roots dry.
It sounds perfectly logical, but that assumption completely ignores the conflict between gravity and capillary action.
I always try to visualize capillary action like a kitchen sponge.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you take a dry sponge and hold it under a running faucet, the water doesn't just instantly shoot out the bottom. The fibrous material of the sponge grabs onto the water molecules.
Yes.
It pulls the water into its matrix, and the water pools at the bottom of the sponge, getting heavier and completely saturated before a single drop finally leaks out.
The sponge analogy is excellent, but let's refine it to understand the container. Imagine that wet sponge sitting outdoors on a patch of dry dirt. The capillary action of the earth below it will slowly pull the moisture out of the sponge.
Makes sense.
Now imagine taking that same wet sponge and wrapping the bottom inside some plastic or sitting it on a steel grate. The water has nowhere to go but out into the open air.
Right?
Potting soil behaves exactly like that sponge. It possesses matric potential, or capillary force, an upward and inward pull created by the adhesion of water molecules to the soil particles and the cohesion of water molecules to each other.
So gravity is trying to pull the water down to the center of the earth,
Yeah.
but the tiny pores in the soil are actively holding on to it.
Yes, and when that descending water reaches the boundary layer where the fine potting soil meets the coarse gravel at the bottom of your pot, the physics change abruptly.
What happens?
Water will not readily move from a finer textured material with strong capillary pull into a coarser material with very weak capillary pull.
Wait, really? It just stops? It doesn't just drip into the empty spaces between the rocks?
It completely stops. The gravitational force is not strong enough to overcome the metric potential of the fine soil right at the interface.
That is wild.
The water will essentially back up. It will not enter the gravel layer until the finer soil above it is 100% saturated.
Meaning every single pore space is completely filled with water and zero oxygen remains.
Exactly. Only then, when the hydrostatic pressure is great enough, will water break the tension and leak into the gravel.
And that creates what the physicists call a perched water table.
Exactly. Instead of improving drainage, the gravel simply moves the saturated anaerobic zone higher up in the pot, closer to the plant's delicate root crown.
Oh man, so you have essentially created a stagnant swamp, resting precariously on top of a pile of rocks.
Yes, and it strips the roots of oxygen and invites immediate bacterial and fungal decay.
That completely inverts standard logic.
Right.
You do see people using gravel for drainage in outdoor landscaping projects all the time.
In an outdoor setting, French drains or gravel trenches work because they are part of a massive, continuous hydrological system.
The surrounding earth is vast, right?
Yes, and capillary action can continue to pull water laterally and downward through the continuous soil profile. But a closed container is a finite hydraulic system. When the water hits the plastic wall and the gravel layer, the capillary continuity is broken.
So if the CEA growers can't use gravel, how do they recreate the rapid drainage of an Andean mountain slope inside a plastic pot?
They rely on absolute substrate uniformity. Instead of creating distinct layers of different materials, they use one highly aerated, chunky substrate mix from the very top of the container to the very bottom.
The cultivation guides outline specific recipes for this, actually. They mix standard potting soil with high percentages of perlite, coarse sand, coconut coir, and composted pine bark.
Perlite is particularly crucial here.
The little white things that look like styrofoam.
Yes, though it's actually an amorphous volcanic glass that expands tremendously when heated, essentially popped rock. It creates massive macropores within the soil matrix. By integrating perlite and pine bark evenly throughout the entire pot, the overall capillary force of the soil is reduced, allowing gravity to pull the water down smoothly and uniformly.
Because the texture is exactly the same from top to bottom, there's no abrupt physical barrier to stop the flow.
Correct. The water moves evenly through the root zone, hydrating the roots while pulling fresh oxygen in behind it, and then it exits freely through large, unobstructed drainage holes at the base of the container.
So the perch water table is eliminated, and the roots breathe just as they would on a rocky slope.
Exactly.
So we have the roots breathing in a perfectly uniform substrate, and the leaves transpiring in a perfectly calibrated mist.
The plant is thriving.
It is.
But thriving isn't the same as fruiting. If we want this tree to actually produce cherimoyas, we have to manipulate its biological clock.
This is where it gets really complicated. The sources explain that cherimoyas are briefly deciduous, meaning they naturally drop their leaves and go dormant before flowering. But inside a climate-controlled warehouse, where the temperature is always a perfect 75 degrees, how does the tree know it's time to drop its leaves?
Well, it doesn't. And that presents the next grand challenge of ecological replication, programming a seasonal cycle.
How do you even do that?
To understand this, we need to look at plant endocrinology. In temperate and subtropical woody plants, dormancy is generally divided into two physiological categories: ecodormancy and endodormancy.
Let's break those down. Ecodormancy sounds environmentally driven.
It is. Ecodormancy is a state of suspended growth dictated entirely by external environmental factors.
Like cold weather.
Yes, if an unseasonable frost hits, the plant stops growing. If you take that same plant and move it into a warm greenhouse, it will immediately resume growth. The plant is ready to go. It is simply waiting for the weather to cooperate.
But the cherimoya operates on endodormancy.
Yes, endodormancy is driven by internal physiological and hormonal blocks within the plant's own tissues.
So it's locked from the inside.
Precisely. Even if you place an endodormant cherimoya tree in a perfectly warm, brilliantly lit, perfectly humidified greenhouse, its buds will refuse to open. The internal chemical locks have not been disengaged.
It's like the plant is on a strict biological shift schedule, and no matter how bright the lights are, it refuses to clock in until it has had its mandated rest period.
That is a very accurate way to frame it. For the cherimoya, that mandated rest period requires the accumulation of chilling hours.
What exactly qualifies as a chilling hour?
Well, while the cherimoya doesn't need the deep, freezing winter of an apple or a peach tree, it absolutely requires a specific threshold of cold exposure to break those internal hormonal blocks. Specifically, it needs between 40 and 100 hours of ambient temperatures hovering precisely between 32 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow, that's specific. What happens if a commercial grower ignores that? Say they want to maximize their yield, so they just keep the warehouse warm and sunny 365 days a year to force continuous growth.
It results in a catastrophic physiological condition known as delayed foliation.
Because the chilling requirement was never met.
Right. The internal levels of growth-inhibiting hormones, like abscisic acid, remain artificially high. The tree becomes deeply confused.
The sources mention that it causes abnormal apical dominance. Can you explain what that looks like in the greenhouse?
Sure. Apical dominance is governed by auxins, which are growth hormones primarily produced at the very tip, the apex of a branch. Normally, these auxins flow downward and suppress the growth of the lower buds.
So it ensures the branch extends outward toward the light.
Yes. But in a state of delayed foliation, the hormonal signaling is completely chaotic. The buds break incredibly slowly, and often, only the terminal buds at the very tips of the branches manage to push out a few weak leaves.
Oh, man.
The entire rest of the branch remains completely bare.
So you end up with a tree that looks spindly and half dead, with just little tufts of leaves at the ends of bare sticks?
Yes, and from a commercial standpoint, it is devastating. Without a robust, synchronized flush of new foliage across the entire canopy, the tree cannot support fruit development. Flowering is sporadic, and yields just plummet.
So to prevent that hormonal chaos, the CEA growers have to basically engineer a fake winter. They have to intentionally stress the plant.
It is deliberate, highly calculated biological stress. For a precise window of 2 to 3 weeks, the growers program the climate computers to alter the environment drastically.
They drop the temperature.
Yes, they drop the nighttime thermostat down to a steady 40 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Simultaneously, they drastically restrict irrigation to the root zone, inducing a state of controlled drought.
So they are perfectly mimicking the onset of the Andean dry, cool season.
Exactly. The combination of thermal stress and moisture stress triggers a massive hormonal shift within the plant.
What happens inside the plant?
The synthesis of abscisic acid peaks, signaling to the tree that winter has arrived. The vascular connections to the old foliages are severed, and the tree sheds all of its tired, battered leaves from the previous season. It enters deep dormancy.
The shift worker is finally allowed to go to sleep.
And then, the awakening. The computer system monitors the temperature accumulation minute by minute.
Counting the chilling hours.
Right. Once the sensors confirm that the tree has experienced exactly 100 hours of chilling temperatures, the system executes a rapid reversal. The radiant heating ramps back up to the eternal spring baseline of 75 degrees. The automated irrigation floods the root zone with water and nutrients.
That sudden shift must hit the plant like a shockwave.
It acts as a profound biological trigger. Because the ended dormancy blocks were properly broken by the cold, the sudden influx of warmth and water stimulates the massive production of gibberellins and cytokinins.
Which are growth-promoting hormones.
Yes. The tree responds with an explosive, perfectly synchronized flush of vibrant green foliage. And more importantly, thousands of flower buds emerge uniformly across the entire greenhouse canopy.
The tree wakes up, fully refreshed, covered in flowers, ready to reproduce.
Exactly.
But this brings us to an entirely new logistical nightmare. We have a sealed warehouse full of blooming flowers. But there are no Andean beetles or specific high-altitude insects to move the pollen around.
Not at all.
And even if a grower released a hive of standard honeybees into the room, the cherimoya flower is botanically designed to actively resist self-pollination.
This is one of the most remarkable reproductive strategies in evolutionary biology. The cherimoya exhibits a mechanism known as protogynous dichogamy.
I read that term in the botanical research. It sounds incredibly complex.
Yeah.
What does protogynous dichogamy actually mean in practice?
It essentially translates to female-first split marriage. It means that the male and female reproductive organs of a single flower mature at entirely different times, completely out of sync with each other. It is a biological firewall designed to prevent a flower from pollinating itself. The cherimoya flower executes this over a very tight 36 to 48-hour window, opening in 2 distinct, non-overlapping phases.
Walk me through the timeline of that 48-hour window. What happens in phase 1?
Phase 1 is the female phase. The flower's thick, fleshy, somewhat prehistoric-looking outer petals separate just slightly, leaving a narrow opening.
Okay.
Deep inside that opening, the stigma, the female reproductive receptor, matures. It turns a bright, glistening white, becomes highly sticky, and begins to emit a strong, sweet, fruity aroma.
So it's sending out a chemical signal to attract any passing insects, waving a flag saying, I am receptive, bring me pollen.
Exactly. But at this exact moment, the flower's own pollen is tightly locked away inside closed anthers. The flower is functionally entirely female. It has absolutely no male pollen to offer the insects that visit it.
And then, a few hours later, the clock ticks into phase 2.
Right. As the flower transitions to the male phase, the physical structure changes. The petals open much wider. But crucially, the female stigma completely dries out, turns brown, and dies.
So it's no longer receptive.
It is no longer sticky and no longer capable of receiving pollen. Then, and only then, do the male anthers burst open, shedding thousands of grains of pollen.
So the flower is finally offering pollen, but its own female receptor is already closed for business. Why would a plant evolve to make reproduction so incredibly difficult for itself?
It is an evolutionary defense against inbreeding depression. If a plant constantly self-pollinates, its genetic diversity plummets, and it becomes highly susceptible to localized diseases or environmental shifts.
So protogynous dichogamy forces cross-pollination.
Yes. An insect must visit a flower in the male phase, get covered in pollen, and then fly to a different flower on a different tree that happens to be in the female phase. It ensures the constant mixing of genetics across the Andean landscape.
Which is brilliant if you are a tree growing on a mountain surrounded by thousands of specialized insects. But if you are inside a sterile CEA warehouse, it is a disaster. How do the growers solve this?
Well, this is where we confront the limitations of automation. You cannot build a robot delicate enough to navigate this. The solution is painstaking, manual human labor.
Human beings.
Human beings must step in and act as the primary biological vector.
The sources describe the hand pollination process,
Yeah.
and it sounds excruciatingly tedious.
It is incredibly labor-intensive. In the late afternoon or early evening, agricultural workers must walk down every single row in the greenhouse, visually inspecting thousands of flowers to find the ones that have entered the male phase.
The ones whose petals have opened wide.
Yes. The workers use a small, fine-bristled artist's brush, usually a size 2 or 3, or a specialized pneumatic aspirator, to carefully sweep the freshly shed pollen out of the male flowers into a small glass vial.
Just sweeping tiny dust into a vial.
Exactly. Because pollen yields can be low, they often mix the collected pollen with an inert carrier substance, like talc powder or lycopodium spores, simply to stretch the supply.
And they can't just turn around and paint it on another flower right then, can they?
Not always, because the female flowers might not be open yet, or the environmental conditions might be wrong. So they seal the vials of pollen and place them under refrigeration overnight to maintain the viability of the microscopic pollen grains.
And then the next morning, the real work begins.
At dawn, the workers return to the greenhouse. They walk the rows again, this time hunting for flowers that are just beginning to crack open into the female phase.
The ones with the narrow opening.
Yes. They take their artist's brushes, dip them into the refrigerated pollen mix, pry open the fleshy petals of the female flower, and physically paint the pollen onto the sticky white stigma.
They have to do that for every single cherimoya they intend to sell. They're literally handcrafting the fruit.
They are.
I did see a fascinating side note in the horticultural forums, though. A grower in Belgium was raising cherimoyas in an unheated greenhouse, and he claimed he didn't hand-pollinate at all, but still got a decent crop. He noticed that local carrion flies had figured out the system and were doing the work for him.
That is a fascinating example of adaptive ecology. Carrion flies are highly sensitive to certain volatile organic compounds, and they will investigate anything that emits a strong, decaying, or highly sweet odor.
Oh, like a rotting meat smell, but in this case, sweet.
It is similar to how the North American pawpaw tree relies on flies and beetles for pollination. But from a commercial perspective, relying on a random fluctuating population of carrion flies to find your greenhouse and reliably pollinate a massive cash crop is not a viable business model.
No, the risk of total crop failure is way too high.
Exactly. Which explains why the hand pollination remains standard practice.
And it also explains the economics. When you realize that a human being had to physically play matchmaker with a tiny paintbrush for that specific piece of fruit to exist, the exorbitant retail price of a cherimoya suddenly makes total sense.
The labor costs are staggering, but it is the only way to guarantee a uniform commercial-scale yield in a controlled environment.
Let's pull back and look at the whole operation. We have ultra-high pressure foggers atomizing water to manipulate invisible vapor pressures.
Right.
We have uniformly chunky substrates manipulating fluid dynamics to defeat capillary action and prevent perched water tables. We have engineered droughts and automated chilling hours to manipulate abscisic acid and force dormancy.
And armies of workers with paintbrushes acting as surrogate insects.
Exactly. Managing all of those variables simultaneously seems beyond human capability. How does a facility manager orchestrate this without constant catastrophic failures?
Well, they don't rely on human memory or manual switches. Modern CEA facilities utilize deeply integrated, autonomous IoT Internet of Things platforms.
Like smart home tech, but for a massive farm.
Exactly. The sources highlight systems like AgroNova, which function as central nervous systems for the greenhouse. These multi-stage climate computers integrate data from hundreds of atmospheric and soil sensors, executing a cohesive, minute-by-minute operating schedule.
To really understand how tightly controlled this is, let's walk through a single 24-hour cycle in the life of an indoor cloud forest. How does the computer start the day?
The day begins with the morning warm-up phase. Before the sun even rises, the central computer activates radiant heating systems built into the floor.
Okay.
It slowly and gently elevates the ambient room temperature to exactly 64.4 degrees Fahrenheit. This gradual thermal increase signals the plant's metabolic pathways to wake up, prompting the stomata to open and active transpiration to begin.
But once the sun is up, they have a problem. The cherimoya evolved under the dappled shade of a high-altitude canopy. If the glass greenhouse gets blasted by direct midday solar radiation, the leaves will scorch.
Which triggers the next autonomous phase. External pyranometers constantly measure the incoming solar radiation.
Pyranometers, so they measure the sun's intensity.
Yes. As the sun climbs and the light intensity crosses a specific threshold, the computer deploys automated energy curtains across the interior roof of the greenhouse.
Just big shades.
These specialized screens physically slide into place, blocking and diffusing 50 to 70% of the incoming sunlight. It perfectly mimics the filtered, scattered light of a dense mountain forest.
If they have to block 70% of the sun, it makes me wonder why they build glass greenhouses at all. Why not just put them in a windowless warehouse and use LED grow lights?
It comes down to capital expenditure versus operational expenditure. Building a massive array of full-spectrum LEDs capable of penetrating a mature tree canopy requires a staggering electrical load.
It's just too expensive.
Exactly. Even blocking 70% of the sun, the remaining 30% of free natural photonic energy is more cost-effective at scale than running thousands of high-wattage lights for 12 hours a day.
That makes a lot of sense. So the curtains are drawn, the light is dappled. But as the day continues to warm up, the vapor pressure deficit begins to creep dangerously close to that 1.2 kPa threshold.
The sensors detect the rising VPD instantly. This triggers the humidity control phase.
Foggers.
The 1,000 psi pumps roar to life, forcing water through the atomizing nozzles. The microfog floods the room, absorbing the excess heat through evaporation, stabilizing the temperature, and pushing the relative humidity back to a safe 70%, keeping the VPD firmly under 1.0.
But pumping massive amounts of fog into a room full of plants is a recipe for fungal disaster if the air stays still. We talked about the anthracnose earlier.
Which is why the climate computer simultaneously manages the laminar airflow phase. Massive horizontal circulation fans run continuously, establishing a constant, gentle current of air throughout the entire canopy.
So the fog is always moving.
Yes. This ensures the fog remains suspended in a gaseous state and distributes evenly, preventing microclimates of stagnant wet air from forming around individual leaves.
As the afternoon wanes and the sun begins to set, the system has to start winding down.
The evening ramp down is highly delicate. The computer slowly lowers the temperature and the humidity targets in precise tandem.
Why do they have to do it in tandem?
Because if the temperature drops too quickly while the air is highly humid, you cross the dew point and water will physically condense out of the air onto the leaves, the exact scenario they're trying to avoid.
Ah, right. And finally, the nighttime phase. The computer takes the temperature down significantly, pushing the room into the low 50s. Why is it so crucial that the plant shivers all night?
It is metabolically vital for fruit quality. During the warm day, the plant photosynthesizes, creating complex carbohydrates and sugars.
Okay.
If the night remains warm, the plant's respiration rate remains high, and it will burn through those newly created carbohydrates just to sustain its elevated metabolism.
It essentially works out all night and burns off all the calories it ate during the day.
Precisely. By aggressively dropping the temperature to 53 degrees, the computer forces the tree's cellular respiration to slow to a crawl.
So it saves the carbs.
Instead of burning the carbohydrates, the tree sequesters them, packing them into the developing fruit. That cold-induced conservation is the direct biochemical mechanism responsible for the rich, complex, sherbet-like sweetness that defines the highland cherimoya.
It is a genuinely awe-inspiring integration of disciplines. Digital sensors, thermodynamics, fluid dynamics, and botanical endocrinology, all functioning in a flawless, endless loop, just to ensure that a piece of fruit tastes perfectly sweet.
It truly redefines our understanding of agriculture. It is no longer farming in the traditional agrarian sense. It is the absolute, uncompromising replication of an entire ecology within a closed system.
We have covered immense ground in this deep dive. We started with the Quechua origins of the cold seeds clinging to the Andean slope.
We certainly did.
We broke down the high-pressure physics of atomized fog and the delicate thresholds of vapor pressure deficit. We completely shattered the grandmother-approved myth of gravel and potting soil, exploring how capillary action and matrix potential create deadly perched water tables.
A very common mistake.
We detailed the cellular manipulation of abscisic acid to force artificial winters and break endodormancy. We examined the evolutionary brilliance and logistical nightmare of protogenous dichogamy and the necessity of hand pollination.
And we watched an autonomous IoT system conduct a flawless daily symphony of light, temperature, and mist.
It is a profound testament to human ingenuity and our relentless drive to overcome biological and geographic limitations.
It really is.
But before we finish up today, I want to leave you with a philosophical question to mull over. We spent this entire session detailing how perfectly we can quantify and recreate the metrics of the Andean mountains inside an industrial warehouse.
Right.
We can perfectly replicate the exact light diffusion, the exact micron size of the mist droplets, the exact hormonal shifts of the winter chilling hours. We can build a perfect algorithmic replica of a mountain in the middle of a concrete city. But if we do that, what happens to the concept of terroir?
Ah, terroir. The fundamental agricultural belief that a crop draws an irreplaceable, unique character and flavor profile from the specific, unquantifiable geographic soil and local climate it was born in.
Exactly. Does the soul of the cherimoya, that specific Mark Twain-endorsed magic, arise organically from the ancient, literal earth of the Andes?
Or, if you program the perfect climate computer, can an algorithm actually grow a better piece of nature than nature itself?
It is perhaps the most profound question we face as we transition further into the era of absolute controlled environment agriculture.
It's definitely something that will keep the industry debating for years.
Something to chew on the next time you bite into a perfect piece of fruit. Keep questioning the world around you, and remember, the next time you step off a hot city street and through a pair of heavy sealed airlock doors, you might just be stepping onto a mountaintop.